Thank you for listening to the Business and Beyond podcast.
We appreciate all of our listeners. If this is your first time listening to the Business and Beyond podcast, we hope you enjoy this episode. Episode 53 of the Business and Beyond podcast is brought to you by Zapata's Phone Repair. I'm Ashton, sitting here with Tony, and joining us today, making a much anticipated return to the Business and Beyond podcast. He's an author, a former actor at ABC Australia, a former film producer at ESPN, and he's joining us from Sydney, Australia. Please welcome Gary Jarjoura. What's going on, Gary?
Hey, yeah, how you doing, guys? It's summer down here, and it's winter there, and but we still get the NFL.
That's right.
Different time zones. I mean, our basically, as I have said before, early Monday mornings and through Mondays is when we get the bulk of the games, or your Sunday games, which is a bit weird.
So does that mean you get to call into work when you have football going on all day Monday?
Yeah, I'm not working currently, but
that's good.
But yeah, I used to get up early, watch as many of the games before I'd go to work. Yeah. And then come back at night and binge the rest of the games usually. Yeah. Always took Super Bowl Monday, as we would call it, Super Bowl Sunday time, because I always took that day off. Yeah. That was a must. That's like Christmas Day.
Which we've always said that we should have a Super Bowl Monday for the recovery after staying up all night watching the Super Bowl. That we need that next day to recover to not go to work.
Exactly, definitely. Well, the funny thing is, with our grand final of our rugby league competition, they changed. It used to be played in the afternoon. Now they play it at night, so Sunday night. So we've copied basically the American model. Mm-hmm. But they play it now. They've shifted it where the next day is a public holiday. Oh. So it'd be like, you imagine that's how they do it. So that it's a public holiday the next day. So that maybe that's what you should do.
Yeah, I like that idea.
One of the topics I was going to bring up, and I may have mentioned to you before, is this season you had the 17 games per team, but you still only had one bye. Mm-hmm. And what I don't understand is everybody's complaining about having played that extra game. It would make so much sense to have a second bye. Yeah. Because not only players would get an extra rest, we as consumers would have another weekend of watching football.
That's right.
You'd have another, a Sunday night, Monday night standalone games. You'd have another Thursday night games. And also, one thing that I find very bizarre is that talking about the Sunday, getting up early and watching on Sunday the bulk of the games, so many games are on at the same time. I mean, I have Red Zone, so I can watch as much games as possible. Now, I prefer to watch less games at that time, because some of those games, they have 8 and 9 games on at one time. Like 7 to 9 games. And it's just like, well, all you're doing is watching highlight packages. Yep. And not actually watching games. And it's called Red Zone. But if you want to catch all the games, because the only other option is you watch a whole game, but the scores and so on. So yeah, I think I don't understand. And let's talk about it from a business point of view, because that's the nature of the. So let me just have some water here. The nature of the podcast is financially it would work out a lot better for everybody else, because for everybody. I don't know why they don't do that.
Well, from the perspective of the teams, obviously you get the extra week off, and owners might be in favor of that, but everybody gets that. So is it an advantage really per owner? It's like, if everybody gets it, is it, where's the advantage, disadvantage? I see the aspect of the money, but until you get a new contract with the television networks, I don't think the owners see a lot of that extra money right up. I bet you next contract comes up on the TV side when they're negotiating, they'll negotiate that in where they get the extra bye, and so when the Cowboys, for example, have 2 bye weeks, obviously, like you mentioned, they can fit in another game into this market that we get to watch that we would normally get to watch because the Cowboys would be playing. So if they'd have done that this year, the TV stations get all of that extra money. I'm sure there would be money, byproduct money for all the owners and all the teams, but man, they're so greedy. They don't want the TV. They want a new TV deal before they go to that. And I think what they're moving to is in a few years there's going to be an 18-game season with 2 bye weeks, and then you just have a nice round 20-week season. And then you're pushing the Super Bowl nearly till March once you do all that.
Yeah.
What does that matter? I mean, that's just the weird thing that's ironic is how it's played. But what I mean, no offense, but what else is really going on in February? To delay the Super Bowl that long. I mean, you're not. It's not like there's anything major.
I agree with you, and they were talking about because of COVID, possibly moving games or doing a reset and taking a week off or something, but they can only do so much because the Super Bowl can't be played more than a week or 2 after the scheduled date. And that's what I was thinking. Like, who cares if it's April? Like, we're going to play the Super Bowl and everyone's going to watch anyways.
Yeah. It was like last year in 2020 when COVID first hit. Our football season runs from March till beginning of October. And because they needed to work things out, the COVID caught everybody by surprise in 2020. They paused our football season, and basically they reduced the number of games, but it went till instead of like finishing in the first week of October, beginning of October, it finished at the end of October. And it's like, okay, some people said, oh, it's starting to get warm and so on, but people still watched it. As you say. And another thing about the thing, so it was just announced Australia was meant to play New Zealand in the cricket in the limited form, starting 10 days or whatever. It's just, and anyway, because of COVID restrictions between Australia and New Zealand, funnily enough, believe it or not, they cancelled the tour, and they're talking about how much money Cricket Australia and Cricket New Zealand will lose because of the cancelled tour because of TV contracts. Now, what I don't understand is if the NFL went to the TV stations, even though you got contracts now, say, listen, we're going to put an extra bye, so we're going to milk it out so you get an extra Sunday night. I mean, surely they'd want that because I read the other day that 91 of the top 100 TV shows on network television are NFL. So it seems a no-brainer to me.
Yeah.
It seems bizarre. It's like here. I mean, because as you say, I love movies, study film, and so on and so on. But too often you watch drama TV or movies or TV shows, you sort of know what's going to happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen in sport. I mean, basically, we all joked about. Let's go back to that the final game of the season, the Chargers and the Raiders, and everybody was joking about, well, if it was a tie, they both get.
Yeah.
You couldn't go any closer to a tie. Yeah. They won on the final play of overtime.
Yeah. And there was a rumor that before the Chargers head coach called a timeout, Derek Carr said, well, we were just going to end it in a tie, and then he called that timeout, and it pissed us off, so we just went ahead and won the game. and I don't know how much truth there is to that, but here we're talking about a Raiders and Chargers game a few weeks after it was played, so there's something to that.
Yeah, it's an all-time classic, and you just go, oh my gosh, did I witness what I just witnessed? I said to people, look, who didn't watch it here, my brothers and friends and that, and I said, go back and, because we have the mini condensed games. I said, just go back and watch the condensed game. Just trying to get a perspective of how crazy that game was. Like what sort of movie could you go to and get that?
With that kind of suspense at the end, yeah.
Yeah,
and even in the bye weeks, if your team's not playing, I know at least for the Cowboys, even when they're on bye week, that's all sports radio is talking about. They're still just talking about the Cowboys. So you would think just extending, even if you don't make the playoffs, for the other teams that don't make the playoffs, extending the regular season out an extra week, that's just more publicity and more media and more talking about your team. And now that playoffs are over, a lot of teams are not even talking about right now. I agree. You think it would be a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you just add it? You'd think the players would be all for it. They're not like playing the extra game, but why wouldn't they want the extra bye week?
Well, your off season is so long. So what I mean. It's like, if somebody said, my fiance's a school teacher, so she gets 6 weeks. Our summers, like, she gets 6 weeks, but then she gets 3 lots of 2 weeks during the year. Now, if you said to her, you get one less week at the Christmas break, so you came back and you get an extra week during the actual year, I know that she'll say, I'll take it during the year. And, as you say, when you're playing football, which is a physical collision sport, you want everybody's, physically and emotionally exhausted. You'd want, hey, wouldn't you want an extra week break during the season, because at the end of the season, you have months off. Can you guys get that happening for next year? I think you could get it happening, because can you imagine it? So we would have this coming weekend would be the super duper whooper wildcard weekend.
Yeah.
Would be coming this weekend, and then so anyway.
Yeah, no, we'll make a petition for that. We'll start pushing for that.
Yeah. And as you say, the drama of what people talk about on talk radio, on all Fox Sports 1, ESPN, all those shows, that they get an extra week as well, as you said. It's just like, because you're just talking drama and all the different things.
Well, lucky for us, we're Cowboys fans, so we get the drama year round with this team.
My phone's been going off about how many times Stephen A. Smith has mentioned the Cowboys.
Yeah.
This way, like, they're not even playing anymore. Why are you still talking about it?
Yeah, they probably are the most talked about team this week of a team that's not even in the playoffs any longer.
And then you're talking about a long off season. Sometime in the middle of July or August, there'll be some crazy story that comes out that probably is not a big deal, but just because it's called the dog days of summer, there's nothing going on in America except baseball, and they have to talk about something. And there's always a Cowboy story that comes out.
Yeah.
Usually negative, just to, I don't know. If it was in the middle of the season, the story wouldn't see the light of day. But it's pretty disappointing on this side being a Cowboys fan right now.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And I almost said in your intro, I almost called you a self-proclaimed Dolphins fan, meaning, yes, he claims he's a Dolphins fan, but, just kind of picking fun at you. But I don't have a lot of room to talk.
We're all sitting at home this week.
Yeah, we're all in the same position.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And it's actually, just getting back to Stephen A. Smith, he's a Steelers fan, isn't he? I think he's a Steelers fan.
I'm not sure he's hardcore. I was thinking Eagles.
Okay,
I think Eagle. I think he's an Eagles fan.
But I think he dislikes the Cowboys so much because he got dumped by a girl in high school or college, and she was a Cowboys fan. At least that's a story he tells.
Yeah.
He may tell it to get publicity.
What a surprise he would get jilted by a girl. What a surprise. Anyway. And
before he was worth $20 million.
Oh, okay. Before he got paid a lot of money. Anyway, So, I'm a Dolphins fan. I'm very frustrated. and they've announced that they're building around Tua again, and they're going to bring someone in. And I'm thinking, okay, great. So another 2 to 3 years of mediocrity, and it's just like keeps going on and on. I mean, it's so frustrating whenever I watch. I just watch the Chargers, and I just think that quarterback, going back to that Chargers game, I mean, that game was over, and that quarterback, it was just like,
Herbert.
Herbert was just going crazy. What he was doing was just, oh my God, he's the new John Elway. And I'm thinking, the Dolphins had him. The Dolphins had all those picks, and they could have, if they picked better, they would have got better players because they had so many picks. They could have picked him. Oh my gosh, they'd be playing this weekend. It'd be changed. But now, they're going with Tua, and a lot of fans go, "Oh, how dare you not support Tua? What sort of fan are you?" and whatever. And I'm going, I'm sorry, but I'm not happy with him because I think he's mediocre.
Yeah.
And we're going to be in mediocrity for years till they realise that he's just a backup, and he's going to get injured, and he's, can only throw so much, and people go, "Oh, you can build around him." It's just like, I'm sorry. Look at the teams that basically win the competition or are the top teams. It's more and more prevalent that you need a top quarterback because it's more and more passing because of all the rules now. You go back and watch an old game, and some of these quarterbacks were hit very heavily, and the defensive backs were hitting wide receivers very heavily, and so on. It's more and more so now that it's slanted towards quarterbacks and receivers, and so if you don't have the quarterback, then you can have a great defense and so on, but you're not going to win. So as a Dolphins fan, I just thought, okay, great, another few years of mediocrity.
Yeah, I think the years of having the bus driver quarterback, as long as you have a competent quarterback, you can build around him, and he didn't have to carry the team. But I think of Joe Namath back in the day. We think of him as this great quarterback, Hall of Famer, and then you really go back and look at his stats. He was a terrible quarterback. He was stat-wise, worse than Eli Manning. But he's really famous, and I don't think the Dolphins just came to this realization that they're going to build around Tua. I think they realized they're not getting Russell Wilson in the offseason. They couldn't get the Texans quarterback where they really tried to. They were the favorites all year. And now that they have no other option, they're just going to say, "Oh yeah, no, we support Tua. He's our guy." And then they go and fire their head coach, which I thought was... I'm not necessarily for firing the Cowboys head coach, Mike McCarthy, but I think he might be more deserving to be fired than Brian Flores, for the Dolphins. I thought that was a little premature for a team that's saying, "Yeah, we're going to stick with Tua." Like either blow it up and rebuild or don't.
Yeah. Well, I think it's gone. We had the chance, the Dolphins. We had all those draft picks. I mean, I think we get... Well, even this year we messed it up because we got the draft picks again from the 49ers, and then we gave one of those back to the Eagles to go up 6 spots. Okay, now Waddle's a good player, but I think you would have got Devontae Smith. Excuse me, guys. Devontae Smith anyway, and you would have had an extra first round pick. And plus, we've given them, the Eagles, our first round pick. And the first round pick the Dolphins get is the 49ers. Now, the 49ers still in the playoffs, so that's going to be, what's that going to be, late 20s, mid-20s, that, or something like that. So that they've messed that up.
It didn't work
so
out.
They don't have the draft pick. So, mediocrity.
Well, going back to this season with your Dolphins, I mean, how heartbreaking was it? What did they start, 0-8?
And they won one game. It was like they lost 7 in a row, and they won 7.
And they won 7.
The only team in history to do that in the same season.
Yeah. They won the very first game against the Patriots, and should have lost that. The Patriots were like just running it up to go for the field goal to ice the game, and the guy fumbled. So because of that, the Dolphins won by a point or two. Lost the next 7. One of those losses was to the Jags, and so on and so on. And there was rumblings and talking about getting Deshaun in, and I thought, okay, good, that might happen. And then, as you say, then they went on the streak of 1-7, got blown out absolutely by the Titans. Absolutely, like people kept going, oh, they're great, but we played all these terrible teams. I think when we played the Jets, one of the times we played the Jets was Joe Flacco, and we played the Saints when that they had their quarterback literally, had no practice. He was the 4th string, So, the Dolphins, people go, oh, okay, it's great, we won all these games and had a winning record. But, I mean, you go back and look at the team, some of the teams that or the quarterbacks they played, it was pretty embarrassing. Basically, we didn't play anyone different.
Yeah, you would much rather have just lost those games and have a better draft pick now than to win.
No, the Eagles had the pick anyways.
Well,
I mean,
you get that up.
You still, I mean, your later round picks will still be 20 picks higher.
That's true.
You still got to do it that way. But yeah, no, we appreciate the Dolphins for doing that, because at one point the Eagles were projected to have 3 top 10 picks, and now it's like 15, 16, and 20 something.
Yeah.
So it's a little better. It helps us Cowboys fans out.
Well, that comes to another thing. Another thing I find unfair is the conferencing. See, in our competition, everybody plays everybody at least once and some twice. Football competition. Now, you could still do that. You could play half the teams once one year and half the teams once the next year. And I know people say, oh, look, you want to conferences because it builds this rivalry. But, excuse me, it's ultimately still a flawed competition. You know what I mean? I mean, it's like you're still, like last year, Washington won your conference. Now, what did they have, a 7-8 or 7-9 or whatever it was? They'd won 7 games and they were in.
Oh.
I mean, look at those years that Seattle made the conference and they get in by having a 7-8. And I think the Carolina Panthers had a losing record one year and they got in. And plus, they get a home field playoff game where they could play someone like, I think they played like the Saints and so on, who had like 10, 11 win seasons.
Yeah.
In the conference, and those sorts of things happen. You look at, Brady for all those years, people, going on about Brady. Well, the reality is that they would always win the conference against the other teams, the Bills, the Jets, and and the Dolphins. Occasionally would, have a good season, but ultimately they would get home field advantage and so on. So, I mean, that's not going to change, obviously, but it's always just makes me think about what a flawed system it is, because it's not 100% fair. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, you have some really good teams with good records that end up sometimes missing out on the playoffs completely. It should be the top in each division and leave the conference championships out of it. Yeah.
Look at the NBA.
Yeah.
They still have different divisions, but it doesn't affect playoffs anymore. Before it was, you have how many 3 divisions in East and 3 divisions in the West, and if you won your division, you were automatically a top in the top 4. And now it doesn't matter. They still have the divisions, I think, mostly because
just for scheduling purposes.
The regional, you're going to play the teams that are closer to you more. In the NFL, that may have been a reason back in the day, but you see different teams. I mean, the Cowboys would make more sense in the AFC West than the Kansas City Chiefs, but the Cowboys, Tex Schramm wanted to stay in the the TV markets of New York, Philadelphia, and Washington. So now the divisions don't, at least in the NFL, don't matter regional wise. I don't think it matters, flying an extra hour somewhere. Like you can get from New York to LA in 3 hours. What difference does it make? Yeah, the rivalries probably have a lot to do with it, but like you said, if you're playing half the league one year, half the other, you can move some of those games around, and the Cowboys and Eagles can still play every year if they wanted to, rather than 2 times a year. But I know in the NBA how they have it. It's divisions are pretty much meaningless. It's just for scheduling purposes, because it's basically in the East you have the top 8 teams, and the West you have the top 8 teams no matter schedule. I mean, even in the NBA they're talking about just getting rid of the East and West Conference altogether and just having 1 through 16, because you have players, or you have teams in the Western Conference have the 8 seed would be the 3 or 4 seed in the Eastern Conference because there's worse teams, or vice versa some years. But
which is good. That's kind of like how the college system works, where it's just everyone. We just rank them the top guys, and then we divide them up into a bracket system after that.
But college has to do that.
Yeah,
it's a necessity because
it
there's
work
100 some.
Pro
Yeah,
level.
there's 100 something teams. In college, you can't play everybody. That's why they have to have them broken up like that. But in the NFL, obviously, you can't play everybody. But the teams you have for your division and your conference, scheduling purposes, like Dallas, Philadelphia, Washington, and New York are going to play one conference in the NFC and one conference in the AFC, or one division. So their schedules are close. So in terms of tiebreakers, they can say, okay, they have the same tiebreaker, they have the same record, they beat each other one time. So you go to who did they play, and they always play 8 of the same teams, and every conference or every division works that way. So it's easier to do tiebreakers. But then again, if you just get rid of all of them, I mean, one of the tiebreakers is conference record. Well, really, that if you think about it, it doesn't matter. If you get screwed into being in the NFC that has Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, NFC this year is definitely a lot better than the AFC. And if you don't even play those teams, your conference record matters comparatively. And you're like, well, just because my conference is harder than their conference, or it really doesn't matter. I mean, division matters because you play them twice a year and you play the same games, but conference record really shouldn't even matter, because it's just who's in your conference. I mean, if you're going to go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, what happens in our competition is, because there's not conferences, is point differential matters.
Yeah.
So there's teams that will. It keeps you going till the end of each game, because I remember certain games and so on, people have gone, they run up a score on us and so on in the NFL and so on. Now it matters in our competition, because quite often teams will finish on the same competition points, means so many wins. So we have the win-loss draw tie thing and so on. So you get the points for that. But yeah, so for and against means something, which means a benefit, which means like some teams like do miss out by one score and things like that. So like, you'll be watching a game and someone will miss an extra, a kick after a try, which is like your touchdown. And you go, geez, I hope that doesn't come back to bite us at the end of the season.
The end of the season,
and it does. Like, you think like, they talk about, garbage time stats and so on, and all those things would come into it. It's just a thought. They're probably not going to do it, but it is interesting because it gives an element of what could happen.
The NFL does have tiebreakers in terms of total points, but I'm not sure it's ever come into consideration because it's so far down on the list of tiebreakers. Yeah. But obviously college football has that, at least in the rankings, that you can't quite put a number on it. You just know if you blew out that team, or if you barely lost to a bad team, it is going to affect you. A win's not a win necessarily in college football. Hockey in the NHL, we use the point system, and the MLS does to an extent. They even use the I don't know if they do in the regular season, but I know in the playoffs they do the aggregate, which is kind of weird. Your road team goal, like how many goals you score on the road compared to the other team, and that has come to FC Dallas, our local team, has come to bite us a couple of years in the playoffs on trying to make the conference finals. I'm not sure how that compares to other world soccer leagues. I know they use it to an extent, but
I
understand.
Soccer is there's less. The scoring is less, so I guess that's probably why they bring in. You go, okay, well, I mean, because there'd be a lot of times. In fact, in the Cricket World Cup, it happened the last one where New Zealand played New England, and it went down to it went down to the scores and so on, but it was like who hit the most sixes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then which is the ultimate score where you hit it over the fence, which is sort of like in baseball when you hit a home run, where you hit it over the fence and so on. So but there's enough of those that happen that you could do that, whereas I guess in soccer it's the scoring is so low.
Beating a team 3-0 compared to just beating them 1-0 makes a big difference, as opposed to football. If you beat them 14-7 as opposed to 14-10, that doesn't really make it. It's not looked at as a blowout, or both of those are relatively close games. It's just one score games.
But another thing that's become very prevalent here is gambling on sport. So I've noticed the huge difference of people like saying knowing the results of the NFL games here, or knowing things happen, and it's got to be because of gambling. Because before people go, the joke would be it's too slow, or blah, blah, blah. Well, mainly people didn't know the rules. They weren't emotionally connected to the teams because they don't know who's who. Mm-hmm. I mean, they don't understand rivalries. They don't understand where teams are from, and so on. But gambling is a big thing here, and there's so many different apps and different things, and so many of the ads during games are just flooded with ads for all these gambling sites and so on. And a friend of mine from LA said he a couple of times a year he drives to Vegas so he can place bets. And I go, really? Can't you just do it on your phone? And he goes, no, not in certain states, which is a good thing, because I think there's just so much. It's just the problem with another problem with gambling is not just people that have addictions, but you try to talk to people about games and they go, they're talking about it from gambling terms as opposed to the game terms.
More so the spread and
you just go, like, I watch some of these shows and they go, I can't spread. I go, well, hang on. Tell me who you think's going to win the game.
Exactly.
That sort of stuff. It's like, I'm confused now. You say they're going to win, but can't spread. But the other thing is, young kids are watching the games, and you think about when we grew up, we're watching the games, and the ads would be for soft drinks and cereals and whatever, and cars. Now it's like cars, alcohol, beer, and when we were young, it would be for cigarettes. Now it's not for cigarettes. So instead of cigarettes, they've got gambling. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so many of the ads, young kids are watching and going, Daddy, what's that? What's and so on.
And even a lot of that's tied in, with like fantasy football, fantasy sports are kind of tying into that at an earlier age of people getting into it, at kind of an entry level to gambling.
And it's interesting you talk about that. It's kind of up and coming there in Australia. It's getting a bigger part of the game. It's the same here. That sports gambling has been around as long as sports have been around. And even there hadn't been a professional team in Las Vegas before a couple of years ago for that reason. They didn't want the players around all the, the sharks and all the sports betting. And now you have two teams in Vegas. Probably, I think a baseball team's about to be there soon. And yeah, one of the states that sports gambling is not legal in is Texas. But I can get on. We have apps. DraftKings is the one I use. I put money on it, but it's more of a fantasy type. I pick a lineup and how those players do, and I'm sure there's rules around it where I'm technically not breaking the law. If I am, avoid everything I just said. I'm just kidding, but and I had a guy that I used to work with. It's funny, and they had parlays going, and I don't know where he went. Obviously, it wasn't legal, but he'd give me a list of games. He said, if you want to give me $10, pick what of course, I never won. Parlays are, they're easy to, very cheap, but you have to pick like 7, 8, 9 different outcomes. So very low risk, low reward. But obviously that wasn't legal. But I think what the industry figured out, sports figured out, is it's happening regardless if you're going to make it illegal or not. And they said there's all this money we're missing out on. So now the Saints playing what's the name of the Super?
Is it the DraftKings?
Not DraftKings. It's it's a casino. The Caesars, Little
Caesars Palace.
Caesars Palace, Superdome or something like that. I'd have to look it up. I didn't know we were going to talk about.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's called Caesars. Yeah.
And
it was Ladies, now it's Caesars.
Exactly, and the Texas Rangers old ballpark, which is now. Is it going to be XFL? Like, who plays in it? I know the XFL played in it.
XFL is,
but they transformed it, and there's a couple of smaller loaded teams playing
it. Here. That's up here. And some of it's called, points bed and all these. Yeah,
exactly, and they named it Choctaw Field or Stadium, or the Choctaw Casino that's right up the road. And it's sports stadiums and sponsorships, and WinStar, the world's largest casino just up the road in Oklahoma, is a sponsor of the Cowboys now. So they realize there's all this money we're losing, not necessarily from people making the bets, but their sponsorship opportunities. Like, God knows how much WinStar paid the Cowboys to be the official casino of the Dallas Cowboys. But, there's a lot of money, and that's like we said, that's a big part of it. Vegas is picking odds, point spreads, everything on all these games, and then the sports leagues are supposed to ignore it and be like, no, that's we're not part of that. And I'm not for it one way or the other. I don't care. You could tell me it's more likely that players are going to get involved in point shaving. Point shaving may or may not, but I think it's going to. There's been instances with referees being involved in it and players being involved in it in the past when it was already illegal. So I'm sure there's lots of stuff going on already that we're not aware of.
It's pretty bad in the subcontinent. So obviously, cricket is huge, but it's really big in the subcontinent. India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and so on. And there's just been so many cases of players being approached and different things. Now, it's not just who wins or loses the game. There's all those, they call it exotic bets, where if you bowl a no ball or something in a certain over, there's odds on that. So that'd be like on a certain, in say baseball, on a certain innings against, so someone's pitching against such and such. If you bowled, so you pitch the second pitch you pitch to them, if you pitch it over their head, where they're not going to hit it, there's odds on those sorts of things.
Yeah, there's easy ways for players to be like, yeah, sure, why not? It's not affecting the game.
Yeah.
And the Super Bowl's coming up in a few weeks.
Prop bets.
Yeah, they'll have how long? Whoever's going to sing the national anthem, is it going to take them more or less than a certain amount of time? But yeah, you're exactly right. They're on DraftKings, or maybe it's not DraftKings, it's another app. But I don't put any money on it. They give you free entries. but it said who's going to score the first touchdown. The first point scored in the game, is it going to be how are they going to score the points? But you're exactly right. That's what happens. They have little things that can make a difference, and all it takes is one of these guys to be approached and saying, hey, I'm not asking you to throw the game. You can still play your game, but just, maybe do this. Maybe don't win by a lot, And obviously the most famous example in sports betting, at least in America, was the Chicago White Sox in the 1919 World Series, and they didn't intend on losing the game. They just said, hey, lose a couple of games, or losing the series. And back then, it was happening back then, and a lot of that had to do with underpaying players, and now you definitely wouldn't have that issue.
Yeah. Well, that's it, and that's happened in our sports too, and that there's terms in that they weren't getting the huge money that they are getting now, and so on. That's different.
And you see movies about it, and they're so realistic. It's not because they're good script writers; it's because it probably happens a lot, and we have no clue. And they're just going off real life what happens. And like I mentioned earlier, the referees, the NBA referees, kind of had an issue with that, with not necessarily messing up games or messing up the endings of games or the different results, but calling certain fouls, shaving points, and making sure they didn't score too much or they didn't score enough. And when you find out, I'll go back, and you may not enjoy this reference because you're a Dolphins fan, and I don't like Tom Brady, trust me, but Deflategate was the most overblown thing in the history. Okay, yeah, he cheated. I agree, he probably did. Deflating balls just so you get better grip, which probably shouldn't have been a rule. Why don't you just say, let any quarterback, whatever you want the ball to be, if you have the ball, you can do it. But people want to act like, okay, you have to take away half of the Super Bowls because of that. I don't know that it helped them win any games. Maybe some of his stats are inflated a little bit. I'm not sure. Yeah, you're talking about the integrity of the game. I agree. Okay, suspend him, whatever. But we had Supreme Court trials dealing with this, and Tom Brady, jokes about how the artist drew Tom Brady. I'm like, why is this even happening? Like, okay, he cheated, give him his 4-game suspension, and people want to take away his whole career, which, again, I'm not a Tom Brady fan, but how much did it really help? And that's what a lot of the point shavings are. If I found out in that game, in which the Cowboys played a terrible game, but that game against the 49ers in the playoffs, if a Cowboys fan finds out that the refs were paid on certain plays to call penalties on the Cowboys, which, honestly, the Cowboys, they deserve every penalty they got. That was terrible. But you find out one play, one ref got paid to make sure something didn't happen against the Cowboys. Man, every Cowboys fan would say, you have to avoid that loss. They should have won that game. And no, really, did it have any outcome on the game? Most of the time it probably doesn't. But you can't do that because it's, there's a reason there's rules against it.
Exactly. I just wanted to mention, I don't know if you guys want to talk about other things, but is the gambling aspect of it, and the unfairness of, talked about the unfairness of conferences and so on and so on. Another thing is the salary cap. What I don't understand is, and we have a salary cap here in our football, but then there's these certain different things you can do. Like we have third-party deals, meaning, okay, if you guys want to sponsor Tony Romo when he's playing as a player, and you've got a business that's making ridiculous amounts of money and you can afford to sponsor him, you can pay Tom Brady to, be your ambassador, and he gets paid, but that doesn't come out of the salary cap. So that's third-party deals, but there's only 3 players from each club to do that, and so on and so on. That's unlimited. But my argument here is, well, that makes a mockery of the salary cap. So why are you having a salary cap if it's not going to do it?
Exactly, yeah.
And like when you get to the salary cap, I'm just like, well, I don't know that it's fair. But like, how does Tampa Bay? Okay, they got all those players together. Now, they're all signing all these players and so on. You're just going, I don't understand how. I mean, is it going to see like the Saints? They say still next year are going to be like 60 million over the cap. Like, the salary cap is bizarre. So it's meant to make everything fairer. But what's going to happen to Tampa, because they've like keep signing all those guys and saying they're going to stay. And I know they want to stay because they want to win, but it's unlike. So I don't know that the salary cap is fair, I guess, is my argument, what I'm coming back to.
No, you're right, because why if you have a cap, can you go over that cap? And I know the Cowboys for a lot of years did that too, and you take the penalties, but they're pushed down the line a little bit. And
it's really confusing because I know the Cowboys are supposed to be over the cap this year, and the Cowboys can flip a switch, something to do with Dak Prescott's contract. He won't lose any money, and they'll gain like $20 million in cap. I'm not a cap expert, but there's a lot of little things they can do where the teams, for the most part, are going to get.
Well, it basically comes down to how you structure these contracts and how you structure the cap. You know, it's not dime for dime how it goes. It's just how you structure that wording
and it's
to how it affects your cap.
And it's TV money also because when Dak signed his contract, he was the second highest paid quarterback. And I said that's irrelevant because the cap's going to go up due with TV deals, and because of COVID, the recession, because of the pandemic, the cap actually, I don't know that it went down, but it stayed the same instead of going up, which people didn't expect. But I said 10 years after he signs that contract, he won't, the contract for 5 years, 4 or 5 years. But a few years after he signs that contract, he's going to be the 8th or 9th highest paid quarterback. And that's how you think of it, because the cap is going to get extended, so his percent of the cap will go down. But like you said, Major League Baseball says they don't have a cap, which technically they don't. They have a luxury tax. So if you go over the cap, you have to pay that. Well, teams like the New York Yankees, that's what the cap's there for. So teams like that can't just buy and spend and spend and spend. And teams like the Colorado Rockies have to trade their players away because they can't pay them enough. We'll just spend we'll spend the luxury. I think one year the luxury tax the Yankees spent was more than the entire salary of one Major League Baseball team. It was ridiculous. And going back to, you were talking about they have deals, or they have a thing in the cap where they can sign the 3 marketing deals or whatever. Yeah, the 3-party deal. There's no rule against that, but obviously you can't nudge. Like, obviously everybody's saying, Dak, take less money, because being the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, you're going to make more money, and we see him in commercials all the time. He's sponsored by so many different companies because he's the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, and I'm sure he makes more. He could have said, all right, I'll take $30 million a year. Just stay, if the Cowboys do want to pay him $40, and if he goes to the Denver Broncos, he's not going to get the same publicity.
Endorsements and everything.
The endorsements, and as far as I know, there's no rule against it. Players can have if they can get the endorsements, who cares? And Jerry Jones is obviously a genius marketer on the business side, a little iffy on the football side. But Jalen Smith, who doesn't even play for the Cowboys, didn't even have a job right now. 2 years ago, had to deal with a sunglasses company and a couple other things, just because he played for the Cowboys. Mm-hmm. He was middle. I think he had a really good year, second or third year. Yeah, he had a really.
He was injured, then he came back, and
it was a good story. Yeah, it was a big story. I'll give him that for the publicity standpoint. But he had one good year where you could say he was a top 10 linebacker. Maybe. But other than that, he was at best average. Yeah. And obviously they cut him, and he signed for a couple different teams and could never, stay on the team. Yeah. But he had endorsement deals because he played for the Dallas Cowboys. And as far as I know, there aren't rules against it. You just can't say, hey, Dak, or hey, whatever, just take less money because we can keep you on the team and under the cap, and then I'll go sign you a deal with whoever. And just like for the Dallas Mavericks, Dirk Nowitzki kept taking pay. Like he could have gone sign with the Lakers. I think one year they offered him a $90 million contract, And he let the Mavericks do what they needed to do and said, just sign me for whatever's left. And Mark Cuban had to been telling him something. Like, hey, when you retire, you're going to be what he is now, an ambassador to the Mavericks.
Yeah.
And we're going to pay, hell, he probably pays him $50 million a year. You know, but you're not allowed to say that.
Yeah, because that happened to the club, the West Tigers I support. Our marquee player, they said he was coming towards the end of his career, and the CEO met with his agent and said, listen, when you retire in 2 years' time, we'll make you an ambassador and we'll blah, 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 we'll give you money. Now, that's illegal and
defeats the whole purpose of the cap.
Yeah, and we got fined, and our salary cap got reduced, and the CEO got stood down for 6 months, and so on. But you can't tell me other clubs are not doing that.
Yeah.
But they're just not stupid enough to.
They have other people doing it. They have
other people doing it. Yeah,
people that don't work for the team or the organization, but they're there in some capacity and say, "Hey, do this." So if they get caught or somebody tells on them, well, I don't know that he just kind of hangs around our team, and he's a liaison or something. A liaison, like he's a contracted worker. He doesn't represent the organization.
You have a term. We have a term here, the brown paper bag, which was when we were growing up in like the 60s and 70s, and that plastic became real big. Like they put our lunch in a brown paper bag and so on. And so that's the whole thing. Is the joke is that there'd be wads of cash in a brown paper bag, and it'd just like somebody you in a parking lot. That's the joke. If you ask players from the 70s and 80s, and they talk about the brown paper bags, and then there's very famous stories about the All Blacks rugby union team, and when it was amateur still, but players would you were able to get like boots from Adidas or whatever, and they go to say, here's a new pair of boots, but they couldn't get their feet in there because there's so much money stuffed in there. And then there was stories about an Australian guy that had some Italian heritage, and so on. He'd go in the off season, he'd go and play in Italy, and because it was amateur and because he'd just bring crowds and everything, they do things like he gets sold a warehouse or a big property for like $1, worth $1 million. And so there's been those stories of different things that went on for many years and I'm sure, the Babe Ruth years, and who knows what's going on. But but the salary cap is something, as I say, I don't understand. I tried to read about it and understand it. And it's just so weirdly complicated. We had players. There's been cases of players here that said, "Oh, okay, they've medically had to retire," because they've done their shoulder or whatever, but they can still get the contracts they were guaranteed. And some of them say, "Well, that has to go." Sometimes I've seen clubs that go, "Well, that has to go against salary cap," and then I've seen other clubs get dispensation and saying they'll still get their money, but it's not going to go against a salary cap. Well, if they're a marquee player, that's such a huge thing. If you're paying you're paying like money that Tony Romo used to get paid, and Jerry Jones can afford to pay him anyway, but that money is or isn't on the salary cap technically. Huge difference. So which comes to like everybody's talking about, like you're talking about the quarterbacks and how much they're going to get paid and so on. I wonder if there's going to be a bit of a changing in the guard. Because are people, obviously the Ravens are not going to let Lamar go. Okay, they're going to keep him and so on. But, is he worth 45, 50 million? Because there's the mediocre, what's his name for Vikings?
Kirk Cousins.
Kirk Cousins. Was he the last of the lucky guys to get the top money being middle of the road? I don't know.
If you're talking from a financial standpoint, most quarterbacks technically would be underpaid. I'm sure Dak Prescott's worth more to the Cowboys than $40 million a year. Now, you can talk about the percent of the salary cap he takes up, is he worth that? No, absolutely not. And there's even studies you can go back, and when they're making the one player is, or the top 5 players are making a certain percentage over, that team never does well. It's when it's more spread out. And honestly, I think where it's going is eventually, maybe not in the next 5 or 10 years, but down the road, is they're going to allow teams to offer ownership stakes to some of these teams, or I mean to some of these players, where you have Patrick Mahomes type, like the quarterbacks that are obviously above average, and there's no way you can let them go. You pay them whatever, you have to keep them, and they'll allow you to do that to where you can say, hey, you get a certain percentage of the team. Where if for whatever happens, if you want to get rid of Tom Brady or whatever and him go to the Buccaneers, you just buy him out of that contract. Like, who cares? We'll give you $50 million to get you out. We can afford it. It's just a salary cap issue.
Yeah, I read something about that. John Elway was offered a part ownership in the Broncos, like 30 years ago or something. Is that true? And
I know he's the GM and president of the Broncos right now. I don't know if he has any ownership stakes.
But you're saying as part of his contract, he was offered.
He doesn't. He doesn't now. But back in the day, when now it's worth billions, right?
Yeah.
But back then, 30 years ago, it was probably worth 150 million. And I think I read somewhere that he was the 5 or 10%.
It might have been. It might have been like, once you retire, you can work for the organization. You're the president of whatever he is right now, president of football operations, GM, whatever, and just say, yeah, you have a job, we'll pay you whatever. Maybe like under the table, and that was kind of a rumor that came out. I assume, because I think that would be completely, that'd be like losing draft picks, fine millions and millions of dollars, and John Elway would be kicked out of the league.
Yeah, that'd be a 30 for 30.
Yeah, you'd be producing that 30 for 30 movie for. Before we go, I don't want to run out of all of our time before we are able to talk about what you have going on. I know you have a lot of different book ideas going on, research you're doing. What can we expect to see from you in 2022 and the years past? Or years coming up?
Forward.
Yeah, forward.
I've been tinkering with an idea for a kids book for forever, which I should try and formulate that, and another fiction book based set in Australia and so on, that was originally an idea for a low budget film, and I thought, well, that's really hard to get going and so on, but I think I'm going to do it as a book, a bit more like you guys know the movie World War Z or Z, as you say.
Yep.
That was based on a book by Max Brooks, who was Mel Brooks' son, and it's sort of not traditionally. It's sort of like it started off an account of a zombie apocalypse. My thing's not about zombies, but that style. I'm thinking of writing the book in that style of a bit of a recount, jump away. Not it's obviously fiction, but not typical fiction like you're writing Frankenstein or something and so on. So that sort of thing. It's business wise. It's very. There's a lot of uncertainty. Everybody says it's a bit hard to know what to invest in. The markets obviously, since we last spoke, have been up and down like yo-yo. So I'm not sure. So at 57, I'm thinking I'm just sort of keeping my gunpowder dry, so to speak. I'm not being too risky, but but even when you do a book, as I say, other friends of mine have books, and they don't even physically print them as paperbacks anymore. They just, unfortunately, the way the world has gone, they just put them straight on Amazon, and people order them from there, which is very difficult in itself, because Amazon won't let people do reviews unless you've bought 3 books from them and done reviews. So that's so that's obviously very biased, and also you don't get money till you have to sell a lot of books before you get any money from them. So so I'm basically going to independently publish these books, and basically the only way you can hope to make any money out of it is if somebody likes the idea and they want to make a TV show or a movie or something out of it, which, if you do that, then fine, you've got somewhere to go with it. But so I need to work on a project and say that's it. Unfortunately, my book, NFL Cliches, as big a plug as you guys gave it, didn't really sell.
I'll blame us for that, maybe.
Yeah. Can't blame you guys for that. So,
which is right here. If you're watching on YouTube, there's his book, which we'll have a link to.
NFL Cliches. I'm talking about there's a guy playing with inflated balls on the front, that may or may not look like Tom. So that's what I'm going to do. It's hard to know what. It's thinking about selling things online, setting up an online business. One of my brothers has done that, and it's really hard because it's like people go, you can sell things online, and somehow you need to find a niche of something gimmicky, or somehow, this is the world where you see so-called influencers.
Yeah.
For me, an influencer, it just seems like any girl in her 20s or 30s puts on a bikini and takes photos of herself and calls herself an influencer, and somehow they get hundreds of thousands of people following.
I know. I don't have that luxury. If I put on a bikini, I'm going to lose followers. But y'all can follow me on TikTok. I'm up to 4,000 followers. If I didn't have a podcast and had a bikini, I might have 400,000. But what are you going to do? I just do what I can. You know what you should do is write a kid's book explaining the salary cap. So when they become our age, they understand. Like, just tell them they're only allowed to spend a certain amount of candy or something. I don't know. That's what you should do.
Actually, you know what? We'll do it together. How about that?
There you go. There you go. A collaboration.
I'll stick to promoting, except, I'm obviously not good at it for your last book. But how about you write the book, I'll promote it, and then we can be co-authors, I guess. Again, when you were on with us last time, I don't believe we were even on YouTube yet.
No.
But now that we are, if you're watching on YouTube, thank you. You can see on the video, again, here's his book, and we'll post a link to this book, as well as all of his other stuff he has going on. Gary, we appreciate you joining us again. It's been interesting trying to time having you on, and the perfect time is afternoon here, morning there, and because obviously the time difference in Australia and Texas. But
it's Thursday here, so the future's still happening. So people are wondering. Yeah, Thursday will happen.
Yeah, let me know what's happening tomorrow. If you have any lottery numbers or anything like that, go ahead and push that our way. But as always, we enjoy having you on. It's been an experience.
Yeah, it's great to become friends with you guys, and great listeners and great conversationalists. So it's fantastic, and keep going. And happy to come on any time and talk about things. And I'd like to, maybe next time, I think I talked to you about cricket, and someone like to explain that. T20 cricket, that might be the next thing that may or may not gain traction in America. So
we do have a league coming in America with the team here in Dallas. I'm not sure when they start. So I did do a little bit of research, and this probably won't bode the same with you, but to talk to Americans that have no clue, it's kind of a mix between baseball and tag. Yeah. To an extent. It's running back and forth a lot, and but it's very close to baseball. It's pretty easy to follow from what little bit of research I did. But like you mentioned earlier, you need a team that you can follow and be emotionally involved in to really be able to appreciate it, and hopefully that's what happens when this new league comes here in America.
Yeah, we'll do that, and then hopefully Nothing against Tom. I'm not saying he's a bad guy, but just so hopefully somebody else wins this year.
I really ruffled your feathers, didn't I? No, I agree. We were both born in Nashville, Tennessee, so I don't know if Tony's the same way right now. I'm rooting for the Titans right now. There's nobody left in the NFC I want to win. So definitely Titans, maybe Chiefs. I wouldn't mind Bengals. But as a Cowboys fan, I have no problem picking a new team. I'm used to it every year, picking a team, a secondary team midway through the playoffs.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah, it comes to like who you're going to pick in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Well, enjoy, guys, and wonderful to chat anytime.
Yeah.
Absolutely, we're definitely going to have you on again.
Never give up. See ya.
Yeah.
All right, see you later.
Thank you again for supporting the Business and Beyond podcast.
Be sure to hit the subscribe button to be alerted every time we post a new episode.